Alright, so just like before, now that I've got the worst of the decade out of the way, it's time to officially go forward with what I think are the top 30 best of the decade films. This is going to be a two-parter because, 30 films. It's going to be a 3-hour long video if I talk about 30 movies that I love. So here's part 1. Now again, it was hard to narrow down which were my favorite movies of the last decade because picking 10 movies that I love from the last 10 years is impossible. So I just decided to go with 30. Obviously there are a ton of movies that got cut from this list, so here are a few honorable mentions of what I think are some of the other great movies of the last decade. I'm not going to go over in detail about them like I did with the dishonorable mentions for the worst of the decade, and these are in no particular order: The Disaster Artist, Cabin in the Woods, Godzilla 2014, the Planet of the Apes trilogy, Mission Impossible, Ghost Protocol, and Fallout, Star Wars The Force Awakens, Rogue One, A Star Wars Story, the Kung Fu Panda sequels, the How to Train Your Dragon sequels, Zootopia, Moana, Tangled, Frozen, Wreck-It Ralph, X-Men First Class and Days of Future Past, Deadpool, Get Out, and The Social Network. And the list of honorable mentions keeps going, but I'll save the rest of those honorable mentions for part 2. For now, let's actually get into the first half of my best of the decade list, starting with number 30. Wonder Woman. Yeah, I might hate Batman vs. Superman, but this right here is the best DC Extended Universe film, and it's also a real game changer for a couple reasons. One, it's the first DCEU film that's universally loved, but it's also the first, not just good, but great comic book movie based off a female heroine, and I think it's done to perfection. Gal Gadot as Diana Prince, aka Wonder Woman, really does shine in this movie. She was pointless in Batman vs. Superman, but here, this is where she really gets to show off her chops. The action scenes are very well done, a lot of the supporting cast is great as well, and the entire No Man Land sequence, where we get our first true introduction to Wonder Woman in action, is an incredible sequence. I was watching in the theater when it came out and was like, wow, they're actually doing this, and I'm feeling something for this. This is really, really well done. If there's any problem with this movie, it's the last 15 minutes aren't that great. But still, for it to be among my 30 favorite movies of the last decade says a lot. I love this movie despite its problems, and it's such a game changer that it deserves a spot on my top 30 list. Number 29. True Grit. The Coen brothers have made a lot of great movies, not just throughout their entire career, but in this decade alone. But for me, True Grit is my favorite of their movies in this decade. It's a classic old-school American Western about revenge, and the cast in here is just phenomenal. Jeff Bridges as Rooster Cogburn is just fantastic, even if his character has become the subject of a lot of jokes because you can't really understand what he's saying. Who else? Matt Damon is great as this Texas Ranger. Josh Brolin is really good as well as the main villain, and he doesn't come across as the way you would originally think. And this is the movie that introduced us to Haley Steinfeld, and she is really good in this movie as well. With the nature of this movie being a Western, it's unforgiving, it's brutal, there's a lot of moments that kind of shock you, and it has its share of weird moments, which is completely in character with the Coen brothers, especially when you get to the dude in the bear outfit. I don't know how to explain that, but it's just one of those very bizarre scenes that you can't do without. So I love this movie. Number 28. Blade Runner 2049. Making a sequel to Blade Runner, a movie that wasn't that much of a financial hit, but is also considered to be one of the greatest movies of all time, is something that I looked at and thought, you are out of your damn mind. But yeah, it's amazing. This movie is wonderfully directed by Denis Villeneuve, who's done a ton of great movies within this decade. The cast is amazing: Ryan Gosling, Ana de Armas, and it's amazing that Harrison Ford is in this movie again as Rick Deckard, but he doesn't come in until probably the end of the second act. Much like with the Star Wars sequel trilogy, the decision to not focus on the original characters is something that I welcome greatly. And on top of all that, it's got a great score, it's got an amazing look. Roger Deakins really shot the hell out of this movie. It's beautiful, it's emotional, and it might be a little too long, but this is one of those movies that I just cannot get over for how beautiful it looks. I prefer the original Blade Runner, obviously, but this one, to make a sequel to Blade Runner and make it work is a true accomplishment. Number 27. Inception. This movie is unbelievably imaginative, and it's Christopher Nolan at the top of his game. This was the movie he made right after The Dark Knight, and it definitely holds up. It's got a very interesting concept with its characters pulling off a heist within dreams. The cast that's in this movie is phenomenal. Leonardo DiCaprio, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Tom Hardy, Ellen Page, Michael Caine, Cillian Murphy, Ken Watanabe, Marion Cotillard. It's an unbelievable ensemble. The score by Hans Zimmer is absolutely iconic and led to the joke of everyone going, "Bwah!" The action scenes and cinematography is just mind-blowing, especially considering how much Christopher Nolan likes to shoot stuff in camera and how little he uses actual computer effects. Like the hallway sequence where you have the hallway spinning around, it just blows your mind at how practical that sequence is. And the ending is one of those things that people 10 years later are still debating on. Is it a dream sequence or is it not? Did the totem actually fall down? And I will never forget the first time I saw this in theaters and the movie just cuts away before we see the totem actually fall and people went, "Aww." So yeah, Inception. It's awesome. Number 26. Ex Machina, one of the greatest low-budget science fiction movies of the last decade. This was the directorial debut of Alex Garland, who's mostly been a screenwriter beforehand. Wow, is this an amazing directorial debut. It's a movie about artificial intelligence, which is nothing new, but along with its great cast, some really great special effects considering how much it cost, and a great script to cap it all off, you are invested in what's going on. Donald Gleason, Oscar Isaac, and Alicia Vikander are really good in this movie, and especially with Oscar Isaac in this movie, who has probably one of the most iconic dances of the last decade. It's very atmospheric, you get a sense of claustrophobia watching it, and just like with Blade Runner, it'll make you question how far you're willing to go with artificial intelligence to the point where if it's actually human or does it still count as a machine. I love this movie. I unfortunately missed this in theaters when it came out, and this was one of those movies that I bought blindly on Blu-ray, and because it's on my best of the decade list, I have not regretted that purchase. Number 25. Logan. This was the movie that Wolverine not only deserved, but needed. For one, it's the Wolverine movie where we finally get to see some R-rated violence, where he cuts people, and not only does blood come out, but limbs fall off. It's incredibly brutal with its violence, but also it's the movie that we needed because it really humanizes Wolverine more than any of the other X-Men movies before it. Hugh Jackman gives an incredible final performance as James Howlett / Logan / Wolverine, and the rest of the supporting cast is great as well, ranging from Sir Patrick Stewart in his final role as Charles Xavier, Stephen Merchant as Caliban, and Daphne Keane as X-23 is so good in this movie as well, and she's especially great considering how little dialogue she actually has. It's not only the Wolverine movie we wanted to see ever since they started making big budget comic book movies, but it's probably the most human X-Men movie ever made. I love Days of Future Past, I love Deadpool, I love First Class, but for me, no X-Men movie even comes close to what Logan has accomplished. It's a fantastic hurrah, and I'm curious to see what the future of this character holds now that he's in the MCU. Number 24. Star Wars: The Last Jedi. This, for me, is the best Star Wars movie to come out of the Disney era. Still not as good as the original trilogy by a long shot, but what Rian Johnson does with this movie is something that gives Star Wars a breath of fresh air, but also makes it feel like Star Wars. I love watching this movie not knowing where it's actually going to go. Anytime it goes in a direction that I think it's going to go, it takes another left turn to something that, oh, okay, this actually is really cool also. Are there problems with it? Of course, but every movie has problems. It's just a question of, do these problems affect your viewing experience? And for me, no. I love how each of the main characters get their own story arc within this one movie. Rey, Finn, Poe Dameron, Kylo Ren, Luke Skywalker. The sequences involving Rey and Kylo Ren and their Force connection is just fantastic. Luke's arc in this movie is very well done as well. Seeing Luke Skywalker as a broken man who's given up on the Force, only to turn around and do the most Jedi thing possible, where he stalls the First Order and lets the Resistance escape to fight another day, is the most Jedi thing any Jedi has ever done. The action scenes are amazing, the John Williams score is incredible, it's the best looking Star Wars movie of the Disney era films, especially with its beautiful crimson red color scheme. The more I think about this movie and the more times I've watched it, the more I've appreciated it, and especially after The Rise of Skywalker came out, that only solidified that, yeah, this is one of my favorite movies of the decade. I don't care what anyone says. I love The Last Jedi. So if I haven't totally lost you with The Last Jedi, then maybe I can bring you back with this. Number 23. The Lego Movie. When everyone heard about this movie going into production, an animated movie about Legos, I really did think that Hollywood was out of ideas. And then the movie came out and God damn it, this is amazing. It's a CG animated movie that looks like it's stop motion, and when I first saw this movie, I legitimately thought it was stop motion because it looked so much like it. All the characters are a ton of fun. The voice cast that they have for these characters are great. Chris Pratt, Elizabeth Banks, Will Arnett, Morgan Freeman. And it's just an endless cast with tons of great cameos. The humor is just non-stop. It's Phil Lord and Chris Miller, so they're known for this type of humor, and it is so funny. Every time I watch this movie, there's always something that I pick up, whether it's some foreground joke that I didn't catch the first time, or a background joke that I totally missed. There's always something new to discover about this movie. And it's ultimately the movie that made me go, okay, there's no excuse for anything to be as bad as it is. If Warner Brothers and Phil Lord and Chris Miller made a movie about Legos that worked, then anything could be good. When doing the best of the decade list, I really couldn't determine what is the biggest surprise of the decade, but if there's anything, then the Lego movie's probably the closest to it. Number 22. The Artist. A lot of people may call this movie gimmicky for just being a modern-day silent movie. I think it's a beautiful love letter to that era of Hollywood films. And what really works about this movie is that all the filmmakers had to basically relearn how to make silent films. And it feels like something you might have missed from the 20s, or I should elaborate, 1920s. The cast is great, especially with Jean Dujardin as the main character. The rest of the supporting cast is great. It's very charming. The score is absolutely beautiful. If there was anything about this movie that I had a problem with, it's that in the third act, the theme from Vertigo shows up from Bernard Herrmann. And that just takes me out of it because the Vertigo theme is so iconic, and all I can think about at the moment is Vertigo. But outside of that, the amount of energy and passion that went into the rest of this movie is just so well deserved. It kind of upsets me that a lot of people are just looking at this movie now as a gimmick, but I think it's absolutely beautiful. Number 21. The Shape of Water. My second favorite movie of 2017, which I still maintain was the best year for movies of the last decade. The Shape of Water is pretty much everything I love when it comes to movies. It's a monster movie, it's from one of my favorite directors, Guillermo del Toro, and it's basically a better, more adult, modern version of Beauty and the Beast than the Beauty and the Beast remake from 2017. Sally Hawkins is incredible in this movie as Elsa, and the fact that she projects so much emotion with little to no dialogue is amazing. Even though Doug Jones is in a costume and covered with tons of makeup and animatronics, it's an impressive performance nonetheless as the creature. Michael Shannon is great in this movie, Octavia Spencer, Richard Jenkins is fantastic as well. The score by Alexandre Desplat really lends itself to the beautiful look, and the production design is absolutely outstanding. This really is a modern fairy tale, and I think it's absolutely great. A lot of people make fun of this movie for being the fish-banging movie that won Best Picture, but There's a reason why this won Best Picture, because it's that freaking good. Number 20. Arrival. What if there was an alien movie out there where the aliens didn't invade us and just wanted to communicate? That's Arrival. It's such a very original and creative movie when it comes to an alien invasion film. The cast is spot on. Amy Adams, Jeremy Renner, and Forrest Whitaker. And even though it's a standard B-movie plot, it's done with so much care, and there's so much subtext in terms of learning to communicate with each other. It's just an incredible science fiction film, and one that does not rely on explosions or action scenes. Every scene in this movie involving Amy Adams trying to communicate with the aliens and coming up with these different symbols to communicate with them is absolutely incredible. And the ending of this movie is really heartfelt and something that I think a lot of people should take under consideration, especially considering the state of our world right now. Number 19. Knives Out. Yep, this was my second favorite movie of 2019. So good, in fact, that it's one of my favorite movies of the last decade. And much like with Cats, I've already talked about this movie well enough, but what I love about Knives Out is just how clever it is. It's a standard whodunit film, sure, but the cast is absolutely spot on. The mystery behind it is so well written, so well constructed, and I love how it's not like Clue where there could be multiple endings. There's only one way this movie ends, and it's the most logical choice. Doesn't mean that it's bad, it's just if it had been any other choice, it probably would not have made any sense. And like I said in the Best of 2019 video, the cast is excellent. Daniel Craig, Chris Evans, Ana de Armas, Jamie Lee Curtis, Michael Shannon, Toni Collette. The list goes on and on. It's a fantastic cast with great performances, a great score. I absolutely love this movie, and to know that Rian Johnson wants to keep making more of these movies based around Daniel Craig's character is something I'm excited for. Apparently, Rian Johnson is still on board to do his own Star Wars trilogy, but if he somehow walks away from that, or that just falls through, then at least we'll be getting more movies like this, and I'm excited. Number 18. Creed. There was no reason to make another Rocky movie after Rocky Balboa. It was all said and done. But to have Rocky be the supporting character to a movie based around Apollo Creed's son was the best thing possible. And much like with Blade Runner 2049 and the Star Wars sequel trilogy, this movie puts Rocky to the side while having the main focus be our main character, Adonis Creed, played by Michael B. Jordan, who is very good in this movie. It does follow similar tropes to the original Rocky, but the heart and spirit of those original movies is still very much there. You get to see the struggles that he's going through trying to break free from his father's shadow or just try to make his own image. The chemistry that he has with Tessa Thompson's character is great as well, and you really buy the romance. And Sylvester Stallone as Rocky is the best he's ever been since the original movie, and he should have won the Best Supporting Actor Oscar over Mark Rylance. Ryan Coogler directs the hell out of it. The boxing scenes are very well done and well filmed, especially the one that's done in one single take. And much like with the original Rocky movie, this movie will leave you just pumping your fists in the air going, Creed, 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 Creed. And if it doesn't make you cry like the end of the first Rocky, then you have no soul. I know I've said that same thing for other movies in other videos, but hey, it's true. Number 17. The Peanuts movie. When I heard that this movie was going to be made by the animation company that did the Ice Age movies, I was skeptical. But then the first trailer came out and we saw the art style and the animation style as well, and I thought it could work. And this movie is a very clear reminder of why I love this property to begin with and why I've always seemed to identify with Charlie Brown as a character. Because you see this kid who's trying to be the best he can. He always thinks of himself as a screw up and everyone else around him just kind of disregards him. I was that kid back in the day, so you can tell how I related to Charlie Brown. And after watching this movie several times, sure, it does pull in elements from a lot of the other Peanuts material, especially with the holiday specials, but it's still very well done. It's very charming, very funny, and it just leaves you with a good feeling at the end. I've heard people out there just say that they absolutely hate this movie, and I don't get it. I think this is very well done, and as true to the Peanuts brand as anything could be. Number 16. Shin Godzilla. Godzilla 2014 was a good Godzilla movie. Shin Godzilla is a fantastic Godzilla movie, and what I think is one of the best foreign films of the last decade. What makes this movie work more than any other Godzilla movie before it, except maybe the original 1954 film, is the filmmaking. Directors Hideaki Anno and Shinji Higuchi deliver us a Godzilla that we have not seen in a long time. This Godzilla is terrifying, he's more indestructible than ever, and this is a Godzilla with many surprises. The first time Godzilla shows up, you're not even sure that it is Godzilla until it continues to evolve throughout this film, and you have no idea what this Godzilla is capable of. And on top of all that, what makes this Godzilla especially scary is the fact that he's probably the most soulless Godzilla ever. There's no character behind this creature, there's no agenda, and having an antagonist that just doesn't think and is driven by something that we don't know of makes it even scarier. And the movie beyond the Godzilla stuff is great as well. The cinematography here is mind-blowing. The way that shots are framed, the way that certain objects are lined up in perfect sync with each other, all the different and unique camera shots used in this movie just give it a very distinct look. The score is great, it's haunting, and this is a movie that treats Godzilla like an environmental disaster, because he is supposed to be a metaphor for all the disasters that Japan had to endure in 2011, specifically the Fukushima meltdown. It's got some of my absolute favorite moments throughout the entire Godzilla franchise, and it seems like every 30 years we get a Godzilla movie that's really about something, where he's not fighting another monster and it's just Godzilla. 1954 we got the original, 1984 we got the Return of Godzilla, 2016 we got Shin Godzilla, so that means sometime in the 2040s we're gonna get another Godzilla movie like this. Hopefully sooner, or I could be dead wrong that we ever get one like this again, because Shin Godzilla really has set the standard for how Godzilla movies should be, and why I always feel like Godzilla is more important than people give him credit for. So that's number 30 through 16. It's time to take a break since we are now halfway through this list. So in a couple of days, I'll be posting part 2 of my top 30 favorite movies of the decade. Now I want to know what you guys think about this list so far. Is there anything you agree with me? Is there anything you disagree with me? Are you salty that I put The Last Jedi on this list? Whatever the case may be, let me know in the comments below. And until next time, I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, leave a comment, support my Patreon page, follow me on social media, and until next time, this is the real Mr. Robinson telling you there's only one.